Hi, this is Stephen Carson coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri, in these United States, and I will confess, current events have me a little distracted. My Twitter feed has been on fire. Check it out. uh, but anyway, iron discipline, right? Because there are many ways to be distracted by the short term, but I have some long-term things in mind, and that's why I've been doing this series on mutual aid, how we can help each other when we no longer trust in the regime to help us, right? And in fact, see the regime as an enemy, and we really just have to look to each other. So that's what this series has been about. We're wrapping it up right now with the last two chapters of the book and some reflections of my own on and some reflections on my own on the future of fraternalism or mutual aid. I did future for fraternalism just because of the whatever that word is for all the letters at the front being the same. Anyway, okay. Only show business is just to mention that I haven't done the art judging of the art show, which I was supposed to at the end of the year and ended up working on my internet connection instead, which hopefully will work nicely today. I think it's been better. But need to take care of that. Oh, other bit of show business is I am the show gratefully receives support through Subscribestar. If you go to the description on YouTube, video description on YouTube, you will see a link to Subscribestar. Most people support the show with a measly $5 a month, and few people doing that starts to add up. Lets me pay my graphic designer, etc. Okay, so let's get right into it. I want to cover these two chapters, and then as I said, I have some thoughts of my own. Alliteration, thank you. Okay, so here we go. All right, so this is really wrapping up, and there's a little sadness. I personally have found it rather inspiring to hear about how people were helping each other in the past through these mutual aid societies, how they moved from strength to strength throughout the late 19th and early 20th century. Throughout all of society, by the way, I've tended to focus on, I haven't, well, I don't know. I think I've told the whole story, but across different racial groups and religious groups and so forth, different sectors of society, mutual aid was functioning really well, and it was one of many things that was a sort of a social glue back then, right? And I think that's part of the reason that I'm sad it's gone. I want to see, or it's not gone, but sad it's diminished so much, and would like to see us consciously return to mutual aid. So the end of the golden age is the penultimate chapter, but we're going to cover both these last chapters real quick. So as had been true for well over a century, more Americans belong to lodges than any other kind of organization aside from churches. This would be in about 100 years ago, the 19-teens, say. There was a President's Research Committee on Social Trends. They counted 20 million members in 1930, but they estimated that the actual total was as high as 35 million. I meant to look up what the population of the U.S. was at that time, but 35 million would have been a good chunk of the population. So despite these high numbers, the age of rapid expansion had ended. So it was really growing for a while through the late 19th, early 20th century, and which got some of them and some of the societies in trouble. They're like, oh, we'll just keep growing like this so we can sort of, plan on more and more members coming in. And then it started to slow down and even flatline eventually. And some of them got into some actuarial trouble, making sure that they could cover their promises, right? So the life insurance orders actually rose between 1920 and 29. The number of lodges remained roughly stable, And this was pretty good, but it compared poorly with that of commercial companies. So commercial companies were coming in offering insurance and so forth, and just as more of a purely economic transaction without all this social aspect that the societies offered. And they started really skyrocketing. So between 1920 and 1929, the number of commercial ordinary policies increased from 16 million to 31 million. So nearly doubling in 9 years. So amazing, right? Let's see. The Masons added 1 million initiates during the 20s. So by 1930, Masons represented a record-breaking 12% of white adults. That is astonishing. A lot of people were Masons. Let's see. So what was limiting growth? Why was it that these societies didn't continue to grow? Well, there were various things, some mismanagement problems in some cases. Another stumbling block, this caught my attention, was the emergence of rival entertainment sources such as the movies and radio. We'll come back to that. I wasn't, throughout this book, I was not thinking about mutual aid societies as, entertainment. The core values of fraternalism, this really caught my attention. The core values of fraternalism, including character building, thrift, and mutual aid, came under increasing assault. And finally, society suffered from laws that hindered their operation and subsidized competitors. So we're going to expand on each of these throughout these 2 chapters. So let's see. There were some mismanagement problems. Memories were fresh of the fate of the once prestigious UOTR. During the 19-teens, it had fallen prey to a cycle of bad management, nepotism, and embezzlement that culminated in the collapse of its bank and other enterprises. So that kind of, there are a lot of societies that were well run, but that sort of thing, gets people nervous, right? In fact, he says financial scandals such as the one with the UOTR were the exceptions. Only rarely did societies disappear because of insolvency or corruption. Moreover, realized I should have the chat where I can see it. Okay. Moreover, commercial companies were not immune to such problems themselves. Well-publicized financial scandals had rocked the old line companies in the 1870s, and in fact had helped usher in the rise of fraternal insurance. So, working with people that you knew and trusted might have a benefit over some commercial company that might be, not running things well. Okay, yeah, back to this entertainment as a competitor. Somebody from the Moose Society lamented that the radio, the automobile, the jazz band, the outdoor entertainment, the fast means of travel had placed the old-style lodge meeting in which the same ceremonies week after week and month after month are carried on somewhat in discard. So I hadn't thought about going to a lodge meeting as a form of entertainment, but I guess you're having to pick between going to your local lodge meeting and going to the movies, and you can see why people would get tempted to go to the movies, etc. And so one person commented, no fraternity can depend entirely on its recreational features to attract members. I was not thinking of it as recreational at all, but anyway, interesting angle. Maybe recreational could be an aspect. I'm thinking of a lot of friends I know who enjoy board gaming together, right? You could imagine it might be nice to have a mutual aid society that provides various, support for each other, and also, you got a place where you can meet and meet together and play together and stuff. Immigrant-based societies, remember some of these societies were very specific to some particular immigrant community. Immigrant societies fell victim to economic successes. As the first and second generations scaled the economic ladder, they had less need for fraternal, financial, and cultural benefits. But he says, and he says assimilation as an explanation for the decline of mutual aid can only carry us so far. However, millions of immigrants in the 19th century experienced the same process. That is, when these mutual aid societies were growing, there were immigrants coming in the 19th century, and they were going, climbing the economic ladder and getting more stability. They too had dropped their ethnic societies after assimilation, but they lined up to join other organizations that were not specifically ethnic. Studies by historians have failed to explain why later immigrants were not nearly as likely as their earlier counterparts to remain joiners. Another flaw in positing immigration as a necessary precondition for mutual aid is the inability to explain the vibrancy of voluntarism in countries lacking large foreign populations. The native-born of Great Britain, for example, established a ubiquitous network of mutual aid through thousands of friendly societies. So this can work for a more ethnically homogeneous, stable population as well, mutual aid, right? Adverse legislation also contributed to fraternal decline. You knew this, you must have known this was coming. Laws regulating societies became increasingly restrictive. Some legislation was meant to help, or the societies viewed it as helping them, but it says legislation cut both ways. For every benefit incurred, there was a price. Some laws hampered societies, both large and small, by limiting the varieties of insurance that they could offer. And there's this thing called endowments. I hadn't heard of this before, but what does it work? An endowment could take a multitude of forms, but typically it entailed a contract that ran for a specified number of years and promised the insured, if he or she were still alive at the end of the time period, a stipulated sum. A leading motivation to purchase endowments was to save for old age. Okay, so this is a mechanism of retirement savings, right? One particular scheme was very controversial, called the tontine, Tontine. I assume that's pronounced tontine. It was the most controversial species of endowment. Under a pure tontine, a group of individuals paid annual sums into a common fund, and after a term of years, the survivors divided the proceeds. It does seem like the incentives of that arrangement are a little, not sure what I think of that. Anyway, he spends quite a bit of time going over the tontines, and I didn't want to get into that so much. But that really didn't do well in the United States, but he points out that the record of the friendly societies in Great Britain shows that fraternal endowments could flourish under the right legal regime. So something to keep in mind. There's we've talked about orphanages, we've talked about old age homes, spas, all the different things these mutual aid societies did, sick benefits, funeral benefits, medical care, and here various forms of old age retirement arrangements, right? Old age insurance, so however you want to say. Skipping a bit about child insurance. Now, group insurance. Here's where we start to see trouble. So what do we mean by group insurance? So the getting insurance through a mutual aid society was viewed as a form of individual insurance because you arranged as an individual, with the lodge, you joined and you paid dues and so forth. But then the lodge would, negotiate as a group for medical services and so forth, as we've discussed, especially the nice deal they would get with doctors. We're focused on that for an episode. Group insurance meant, and we're probably all familiar with this now, but it was sort of a new thing back about 100 years ago. Group insurance represented a major departure from commercial and fraternal precedents because employers paid the premiums instead of the insured individual, and the insured individuals did not have to take a medical examination. It does seem a little crazy to me. I mean, I've got a wife who's got chronic health issues. They never asked for any check on any of us, with my health insurance that's through my company, I'm like, aren't they a little scared of what they're getting into? You know, insuring random people, basically. Um, so the explosive growth of group insurance caught fraternal societies completely off guard, and restrictive legislation left them helpless to respond. By requiring medical examinations, the law effectively ruled out fraternal group insurance. Um, so they did some various legal battles and so forth, but didn't really make much headway in terms of themselves offering group insurance. And so this ended up cutting into basically being a competitor to what mutual aid societies offered. The sale of group insurance, almost all through commercial insurers, spread like wildfire. The number of persons covered rose from 99,000 in 1915 to 1.6 million in 1920. So that's 5 years. It went from 100,000 to 1.6 million. Anyway, I'm not going to go into great detail. We all live in a world where group insurance has won, and in my view, it's not entirely a great arrangement by separating, the service provider from the payer, from the one who needs the services, the individual who needs the healthcare, and sticking somebody else in there, a few somebody else's, right? Your employer and the medical insurance company. Well, I think we've seen it's resulted in weird stuff like you've noticed with the crazy high prices, sticker prices, and then the insurance company is like, well, no, we don't pay that. They can charge, they can say that that's the price, but we're only going to pay this much, and it's like, what cockamamie scheme is this? Like in other parts of my life, I go to the store, there's a price, I pay the price. It isn't like a fake price, So anyway, it's just a whole messed up system we have now with the third party payer arrangements. So the rise of group insurance had more long-term consequences. As one of the first fringe benefits, it marked the increasing centralization of benefits such as life insurance in the workplace. Because of the third-party payment method, thousands of workers for the first time no longer obtained insurance on an individual basis. By the way, just because of the peculiarities of my career, such as it is, I did procure insurance individually for quite a while. I was working as a contract programmer for a variety of companies, and I found that it was easier to just arrange my benefits as an individual. This is when I was single. Arrange my benefits as an individual, have them just give me a straight, not be an employee of anyone, but just have them pay me in U.S. terms 1099. It's just they give me money and they don't take anything out of it, which meant I had to manage my own tax withholding and all that sort of stuff. But I found that overall, once I figured it all out and got everything arranged, it was much more stable just to handle it all myself, and then I could go from contract to contract and job to job, and I never had to change my insurance and refigure things out and remake choices. I figured it out once, and then just could be stable in that in my benefits that I arranged. So anyway, I actually personally have experience with that, and I remember checking back into it later, like after I got married, wondering, hey, I wonder if I want to see about that again. And it had already become like almost impossible. Like the prices had gone way up on that sort of thing. I don't know what changed, but that in my own work career, I saw a shift there where it became harder to do it as an individual. Okay, anyway, so yeah, you get the third party payment method. People aren't used to getting insurance themselves anymore. They're getting it through their employer. Let's see. Yeah, so these arrangements later sowed the seeds that later flowered into the modern third-party payment system in healthcare. After Massachusetts required employers to contract with commercial accident insurers during the 19-teens, it was pointed out many patients who had hitherto received free treatment now paid for their hospital care, indirectly at least, through third-party payment. I had to highlight that because Massachusetts has a history of introducing terrible things into the United States, like compulsory state schooling, for example. Massachusetts was the one to get that going in the United States. Workmen's compensation spurred centralization of benefits in a subtler way by motivating firms to create an infrastructure for the disbursement of financial benefits. So once they were forced to provide workmen's comp, they had to be able to figure out how to do financial benefits, set up a system, set up a bureaucracy, and then once it's there, it's easier to start providing health insurance through that and so on and so forth, right? The federal government was instrumental in speeding the centralization through amendments to the tax code. In 1920, the Treasury ruled that the premiums of group policies paid by employers and employees were tax exempt. This exemption did not apply to premiums on individually purchased policies. So I highlighted this week a video by Academic Agent where he talked about how it's sort of ridiculous to talk about the free market versus socialism right now, because really what we've had is about a century of corporatism. Well, this here is the sort of thing that I think he would have in mind. The government sets it up so that in this case, the tax code, such that it rather strongly nudges you to be tied in with your corporation rather than making your own individual arrangements, which would leave you more free to float around as a worker, right? Now you feel more tied to your company. And how many times have I heard people say, yeah, I'd quit, but I really need the medical insurance. I'm afraid of not having health insurance if I quit my job and stuff like that, right? So it really strengthened the hand of corporations. And this, among many, many other things, is how we've had this century of corporatism. So rising discontent with legislation provoked a general debate among fraternalists about the desirability of government regulation. And there were ones who, were more laissez-faire, and some who liked the the regulation of fraternities and so forth. Here's a great quote. Zealous defender of the laissez-faire approach was a fellow named George A. Scott. In a speech to the NFCA in 1920, he chastised fraternalists for their eagerness to stake their hopes on government. According to Scott, the effect of legislation, which we ourselves have secured after years of hard struggle, was to ossify the fraternal system and undermine its former appeal. He said, no fraternal society can today go into this field, health insurance for the entire family, and supply what the commercial companies are supplying. The law which we made will not permit it. In other words, he says, fraternal societies themselves had lobbied for some of these laws that were now really tying their hands. No fraternal society can today write group insurance, not even on so small a group as a member's family. The law which we made will not permit it. No fraternal society can today write insurance contracts in combination with savings bank deposits, which are being written by commercial companies in every town, city that has savings banks. The law which we made will not permit it. So as mentioned earlier, they thought these laws would help them for various reasons, and they ended up ultimately being a real problem for them. And then, who was it? Scott concluded, fraternal beneficiary system. The fraternal beneficiary system came into being without the aid of statutes, without the aid of legislation, ran until 1892 without statutory guide. During that time, the system made greater growth than it has since. We may now well exclaim, give us less law and more fraternity. Man, I should have probably made that the title of the show. Give us less law and more fraternity. That is great. It's, you know what? I'm going to add that to my notes for my closing comments. Sorry. I should have caught that before. That's excellent. Okay. All right. So, yeah, now this one, I'm having a little trouble understanding this, but it does feel familiar, even if the terminology is throwing me a little bit. From mutual aid to service. So there came to be a change in emphasis on what counted as virtuous. Age-old virtues such as mutual aid, character building, self-restraint, thrift, and self-help, once taken for granted, came under fire either as outmoded or as drastically in need of modification. And remember, all those terms were things we've seen throughout this series. Mutual aid, character building, self-restraint, thrift, self-help. This was a huge value in the fraternal society movement, the mutual aid movement. These were the great values, right? So challenges started to these old ideas came from a wide range of opinion leaders. Some reformers, such as Isaac Rubinow, questioned the efficacy of mutual aid, family networks, and neighborhood cooperation as solutions to poverty and dependence. Similar concerns had appeared in the comments of the proponents of mothers' pensions, who worried that stressing self-help, character building, and mutual aid detracted from the united action needed to address the broader problems of the community and the nation. M.L. Hale, for example, asked whether in the present vast and intricate plan of society is not the real responsibility with the state rather than with the neighborhood. So I think what's going on here is they're like, look, this focus on sort of localist, smaller solutions is interfering with massive political movements that will get the state to get involved, right? And it kind of sound like commies. I mean, I don't want to oversimplify, but you know what I mean? Like, they don't want people to help each other in a voluntaristic, private, property-oriented way. They want it to be socialized. They want charity to be socialized, right? Rubinow regarded thrift as a positive vice when it reduced the standard of life not only below the desirable social standard, but even below the physiological standard. What? This is crazy stuff. So thrift is terrible because people might be too thrifty and not feed themselves or something. Oh yeah, one more from Rubinow. He's a character. He warned that any movement for compulsory insurance must meet its strongest opponent in the fetishism of self-help. The fetishism of self-help. What is his deal? These attitudes represented a culmination of environmentalist ideas as reflected in Abraham Epstein's contention that poverty was beyond the control of the individual. The old emphasis on character and distinctions between the worthy and the unworthy were deemed moralistic and unfair, right? So this all should sound familiar, right? It's not you, man, it's the system. You know, we need to fix the system. You live in a matrix of, I'm going to be anachronistic here. You live in a white supremacist society, right? The whole system's against you or whatever. We need to stop helping each other on this small scale. We need to fix the system. We need to do something big, You, the individual, are, basically helpless in the face of this system that needs to be fixed or something. Whereas, the emphasis on mutual aid was always that empowering, we want to help you stand on your own 2 feet, right? Through the contacts you make, through the society, through the support we give each other, through job opportunities you get by being in this network. We want to help you rise up, the individual. Instead, poverty's beyond the control of the individual. Very different emphasis. Upside down emphasis, it seems to me. Upside down from the traditional mutual aid emphasis. In 1918, Clarence W. Tabor used his textbook Business of the Household to warn that if savings means stunted lives, that is, physical derelicts or mental incompetence, through enforced self-denial and the absence of bodily comforts, or the starving of mental cravings and the sacrifice of spiritual development, then the price of increased bank deposits is too high. Again, this attack on thrift. What is the deal? So for Barton, the best substitute, he talks about Bruce Barton. author of, he espoused the ideal of self-realization rather than self-reliance. Okay. And for him, the best substitute for the old folk wisdom was service. Okay, so here's this term service, which is throwing me a bit because they seem to have something, there's a term of art aspect to it here. So they mean something specific. All this talk of service was not new, of course. At the turn of the century, a key belief of the social gospelites was the necessity that service be enlisted in a crusade to advance the kingdom of God on earth. As promoted in the 1920s, however, the concept had become secularized and was not tied to a specific political agenda. Okay, there's a whole rabbit hole I'm not going to go down here about social gospelites and advancing the kingdom of God on earth, but post-millennial pietists, the PMPs, recommend Rothbard on that. And if you want to picture someone who, people who would give you an idea of what this sort of creature is even today, think of Bill and Hillary Clinton. They are social gospelites, post-millennial pietists. We need to bring the kingdom of God on earth, good and hard, through the force of the state, you know. So anyway, that's where this is coming from. So the agenda of service clashed with the most valued traditions of fraternalism. Societies stressed reciprocity and mutual self-interest. The byword of service was stewardship. The duty of the good steward was to promote altruism for the betterment of society as a whole, not the members of a single organization, right? So we switch from the emphasis of the mutual aid societies to helping each other, help the people you know in your town, in your lodge, you know, that have been vetted as upstanding guys that are not malingers, right? Not layabouts. They're hardworking guys like you. You want to support each other, right? Often you know them personally. Instead of that, we're going to help humanity, be altruistic and help humanity, society. And it gets more vague and more, you know, high sounding, but I think really, as we should know by now, that kind of high sounding rhetoric doesn't necessarily lead to good things. A good indicator that change was afoot was the rise of service clubs, such as Rotary International, Lions International, and Kiwanis International, all established between 1905 and 1917. Unlike fraternal societies, these catered exclusively to professionals and businessmen. In the name of service, the members pledged themselves to community and national betterment. They paid homage to a generalized altruism rather than reciprocity toward peers. Okay? The policy of the Lions was, no club shall hold as one of its objects financial benefits to its members. This is very opposite of the fraternal societies who want to help each other succeed financially. And by helping each other succeed financially, they put themselves in a position as a club and as individuals to be helpful to the people around them, right? But this philosophy is quite different. So these service clubs started to do very well in the 20s. And in response, many fraternal officials tried to remake their societies in subtle ways into the more fashionable image of service. The big fraternities are finding the appeal to self-interest with which they started less attractive to the average prospective member than the idea of doing something for others. I'm thinking some people, some of my viewers are like wanting me to bring up Ayn Rand right now, you know, and I get it. Anyway, okay, I'm going to skip. He has a lot of numbers for how much people are being helped in terms of death and disability and sickness and accident at different times and all that. I'm going to kind of skip over a bit of that, though it's available, so you know. Oh, Clossington makes a comment. Lions and Rotary are extremely expensive to join and not worth joining unless you're a wealthy small business owner. Thank you, Clossington. Let's see. So a driving force behind these changes was James J. Davis. Davis, who had once subscribed to the philosophy of mutual aid, now portrayed his organization as an exemplar of the twin virtues of charity and service. He described both ideals as resting on the same premise of an open hand and the open heart. In 1935, Davis carried the emphasis on service to its logical extreme. In his annual address, he urged that official publications hereafter refer to our fraternity as a service organization rather than a fraternal organization. He even pondered the unthinkable elimination of cash, sick, and funeral benefits, traditional things that the society offered. He asked whether the insurance unduly pandered to self-interest at the expense of fostering that heart-warming glow which comes from the knowledge of good deeds well done without thought of personal reward. So, again, using an anachronistic term here, it sounds like the sort of more humble, smaller vision of mutual aid societies, help each other, help your fellow, help your neighbor that's next to you, right? Build success with each other, and then be in a position to be charitable and so forth. This sort of humbler path has been replaced with sort of humanitarian rhetoric and, if I may say, virtue signaling, right? That's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like basically virtue signaling. They had a fad of virtue signaling. Unfortunately, we're still in that fad to this day, 100 years later. Okay, so that's what I wanted to highlight from there. Now, final chapter, Vanishing Fraternalism. Question mark, by the way. Vanishing Fraternalism? Question mark. I want to cover this and some of my own thoughts on the future of fraternalism. On the whole, fraternal societies were in good shape on the eve of the Great Depression. Membership, although dropping relative to population, remained at high levels. Lodges continued to wield enormous influence. The authors of a study found that 48% of working class adult males in 1924 were lodge members. Let me say that one more time. 48% of working class adult males in 1924 were lodge members. So, it reminds me of like the America First movement, resisting entry into World War II. You'd never know unless you read alternative sources of information that was the largest anti-war movement in the history of the United States, still is to this day. And again, this seems like almost getting into this almost feels like an obscure academic exercise to study about mutual aid societies. It was half of all the working class males were in these things in 1924. I mean, this was a huge aspect of American life for a long time and for many, many people. It's only obscure because our regime doesn't like it and would not want to see it return to the strength it had back then, right? That's why we don't hear about this stuff and we have to dig into it ourselves. So let's see. Obviously, there was the Depression, and that had consequences. Both white and black organizations suffered from the consequences of high employment that crested at 25% in 1933. This meant that people were not paying dues or not paying their insurance policies with the insurance orders. They were having to lapse on these things. A lapsed member of a black society in Mississippi summarized a recurrent fraternal complaint. People ain't got no work. How they going to pay dues when they can't eat? It's a good point. So, I see the state in this, right? Because I'm an Austrian economist and I know that the Depression was not a random market phenomenon, but in fact it was a 1-2 punch of the Federal Reserve inflating the money supply, thereby creating an artificial business cycle, and then first Hoover and then FDR preventing recovery through all their alphabet agencies and New Deal 1, New Deal 2, and all this stuff, prevented what we saw in 1921 when there was a similarly bad downturn in the stock exchange in the market. But the whole thing was over in like 18 months because the wise president of that time just sat back and, he didn't just sit back. He cut government expenditure and left room for the private economy to recover, and it recovered quickly. Hoover and FDR were tinkerers and social engineers and had to get in there and do things and just prolong the Depression into 16 years, from 1929 to 1946, or 45, I guess. 46 is when we came out of it finally. I blame this impact on the mutual aid societies of the Depression on, government mismanagement. So this gloomy picture of the impact on the mutual aid societies contrasted with those of previous depressions. During hard times in the past, workers had kept their dues current through strategies such as drawing from savings, borrowing money, or turning to kin networks. But the problem was the unprecedented duration of the Great Depression. High unemployment persisted for a decade. And it just, eventually all the wells run dry, right? And they weren't able to keep up their payments to continue to be part of these societies and so forth. Which meant they were without safety nets, right? So it was a bad situation. As all my grandparents who went through the Depression recounted to me when I was a boy. A study of 65 life insurance orders found that only 5 had ceased operation as fraternal societies in the 30s. I'm sorry, I skipped a key sentence. Even with these constraints, fraternal finances held up rather well during the Depression. A study of 65 life insurance orders found that only 5 had ceased operation as fraternal societies in the 30s. We covered it before in talking about specific orders and stuff, but they had learned, sometimes through doing it wrong at first, they had learned to be conservative in how they managed their finances. And that allowed them to go through this by managing things very carefully to ride through these hard times and not get driven out of existence. The individual lodges did not fare nearly as well as the national organizations. There was a drop of about 20% individual lodges from 30 to 35, but that didn't seem to be from bankruptcy or inability to pay benefits. It was more that there were mergers with nearby lodges, or memberships reduced to levels insufficient to maintain official standing. So people were dropping out because they couldn't make their payments, so they had to actually merge or shut down some individual lodges, even though the overall societies continued. Let's see. The data for the life insurance orders do not show that societies failed their members during the Depression. On the contrary, they responded with resourcefulness and redoubled commitment to social welfare. Let's see. Yeah, information gathered from several detailed studies of fraternal orphanages, sanitariums, and homes for the aged shows that these institutions came through the Depression providing services to an increased number of residents. So, yes, there was definitely an impact, definitely hurt the fraternal orders going through the Depression. Wish it hadn't happened. But I thought it was worth highlighting here that they actually were fairly resilient, nevertheless, despite, all this being thrown at them. So here we get to the really unfortunate part of the story. There is reason to believe that a relationship existed between the emerging welfare state and the decline of fraternal services. Most notably, the first signs of benefit retrenchment appeared after 1935, the year the Social Security Act became law under FDR. The SBA cited Social Security and other welfare programs as justification, not only for rejecting applicants, but for closing down entirely, closing down homes for the elderly and for orphans. The Moose, Loyal Order of the Moose, they urged the Supreme Council to consider restricting sick benefits to members under age 65. As justification, he stressed that these individuals, the individuals over 65, were eligible for aid under the Social Security Act. So the welfare state was coming in, mutual aid societies started to shrink in terms of their coverage and their services and so forth. Moose Haven Board of Governors reported that Moose Haven, an orphanage, had the smallest population since 1931. He asserted that, not the orphanage. That's Moose Heart. Moose Haven is the old folks' home. Reported that Moose Haven had the smallest population since 1931. The major reason for this decrease is undoubtedly the operation of the old age pensions in most of the states. By the middle of the decade, more fraternal leaders than ever defended the expanded welfare state as both consistent with and a logical extension of fraternalism. James J. Davis again, for example. No fraternal organization was more supportive of Social Security than the FOE, which was not a newcomer to the issue. It had pushed hard for government old age pensions at both the state and national levels. For good reason, Franklin D. Roosevelt, while governor of New York, credited the FOE as the most important force for showing the need for old age pension legislation. So some of these orders were pushing for it or were being taken as a precedent for the state getting involved with these things. There were financial reasons for some fraternalists to welcome the prospect of an expanding welfare state. The establishment of Social Security and other programs provided excuses to shed costly services. Though societies had maintained social welfare spending at high levels during the Depression, it was becoming an expensive proposition. The burdens were especially great because the membership base was older and smaller. If government assumed responsibility, societies would be free to function in less challenging roles as life insurance or convivial organizations. Despite this shift in outlook, many fraternalists still voiced opposition to the expanding welfare state, and I am just loving some of these quotes, so I'm going to share them with you. Walter Basye, B-A-S-Y-E, I have no idea how to pronounce that. Walter Basye concluded that this experience proved that an old age pension system was not a proper function of the federal government. The fact that fraternal society had provided a great deal of Social Security in this country. Security that creates paupers is not security at all. Charity and pauperism create a condition which is the same no matter what it is called. The only reason Social Security is politically popular is because some people have an idea that they will receive something for nothing at the expense of their neighbors. They are bound to be disappointed. He called it. Another fraternal opponent of New Deal welfare programs was D. Emmett Bradshaw, president of the Woodmen of the World. In 1943, Bradshaw predicted that higher taxes for Social Security would worsen unemployment and thus undermine self-help. For Bradshaw, full employment was the only guarantee to us that we can expand our membership and continue to collect from present members payments on existing insurance. He imagined the following scenario under an expanded welfare state. Just use your imagination, see if you can see what Bradshaw was picturing here. Rugged individualism is crowded out, and the people lose their ambition and become listless as they drop toward the valley of delusions called socialism. Well said, sir. Bina West of the WBA condemned New Deal programs. West ridiculed suggestions that Social Security was just an expanded form of cooperative insurance or represented a culmination of fraternal principles. She charged that the trust fund was not a true reserve, but instead a mere bookkeeping entry. The premiums to finance the program, she asserted, could be used by the government for any purpose, good or bad. As with compulsory health insurance, West worried that Social Security would pose a threat to American practices of mutual aid. She asked, is there any beautiful ritualism or human tenderness in a governmental bureau? Good question. Giles, I forget who Giles is, he cautioned that government was incapable of approximating the warm handclasp from a fellow member or the friendly visitation of fraternalists to a stricken brother. A top official of the SBA went further by declaring that fraternal societies, not federal bureaucrats, were best able to teach individuals how to be self-sustaining and to provide for their own future. Great stuff from all those people. Prophetic words, I think. So, fraternalism since the Depression. During previous eras, fraternal societies had bounced back from hard times. This was not the case following the Great Depression. Membership recovered somewhat, but it never approximated the 1929 level relative to population. That is, right before the Depression kicked in was really the high point. Never really got back to that. By the beginning of the 1940s, the societies were in full retreat as social welfare institutions. Conviviality or life insurance instead of mutual aid became the order of the day. But these inducements were rarely enough to attract and hold members. By assuming fraternal welfare burdens, governments had undermined much of the reason for the existence of societies and thus for people to join. And then, side point, he says this might not have been so bad if fraternal orders couldn't have filled other niches. There were other things they could have done. Though medical care had once seemed a promising area for growth, but experiments in this area had floundered in great part because of opposition from the medical associations. I've mentioned this in a previous stream where we focus on it more, but I loathe the American Medical Association and all such organizations. They're just evil. They would gladly sacrifice the health of everyone so that they can make a few more bucks, and they do. A wide gamut of tax, economic, and legal incentives discriminated against health services based on individual rather than group subscription. But there were still some fraternal success stories in the post-war period. Societies catering to groups or geographical areas characterized by weak third-party payment systems continued to flourish in the provision of medical care. This name of this organization, I just had to call it out. It's hilarious. The Lily White Security Benefit Association of Florida is one that increased social welfare services during the 40s and the 50s. So some actually grew their services after the Depression. The hospitals of organizations such as El Centro Español and the French Mutual Benefit Society remained in operation until the 80s, as covered previously. Although they eventually closed, their survival indicates that societies could be important service providers under the right conditions. Even among the middle class, there were instances of fraternal philanthropy on a substantial scale. The experience of the Moose International, formerly Loyal Order of the Moose, stands out. Its continuing commitment to social welfare runs contrary to the scenario of fraternal failure. And I'm not going to go through the details, but all the details, but he talks about how they continued and even grew their social welfare programs and worked on growing their membership. So membership began to recover, and by the middle of the 40s actually surpassed the level of the 1920s. So overall, mutual aid societies never got bigger than 1929, but this Loyal Order of the Moose in particular did surpass the level of the 20s through some good work. Although some fraternalists in the Loyal Order of Moose had expressed doubt during the 20s about the need for sick and funeral benefits, this society did not use the Depression as a pretext to abolish them. Indeed, spending for this purpose rose. And again, he goes into some details I'll skip over for now. Let's see. Some things were decreased. The continued development and extension of Social Security and unemployment compensation by both the national and state governments were a justification for being less involved with benefits. It made payment of the contractual benefits by member lodges less appealing to the average man than it was when the program was instituted many years ago. I mean, I don't need to belabor it. The government crowded out mutual aid. That's part of the story for sure. So the Supreme Council did not phase out the program because of the financial stresses of the Depression. They got through that, but because in an era of wartime prosperity, it no longer deemed it necessary. The Loyal Order of Moose, though, jealously preserved and in many ways expanded Mooseheart, the orphanage that we spent so much time on previously. In 1941, the Supreme Council voted to lower the admission requirements by opening the doors to more children with fathers who were alive and to children and their mothers who did not show complete dependency. So they're expanding who's allowed to come, make use of the orphanage. This took place in tandem with efforts to improve the quality of the service by expanding the physical plant and increasing the amount and variety of scholarships. The Loyal Order of Moose raised much of the money by strengthening the fraternal tie through the establishment of state Moose associations. In 1998, the children received a full college scholarship as long as they maintained a B- average for 4 years at Mooseheart. So they actually grew. But the population of Mooseheart continued to fall for most of the post-war period. By 1950, it had declined to 766 children, and despite a comfortable endowment of $150 million, which is real money in 1950, fewer than 300 residents were left in 1998. The decline was caused by the rise of alternatives such as foster homes and aid to families with dependent children. AFDC is a government welfare program, federal welfare program. So Moose Haven, in turn, the old folks home, also had less people making use of it. By the early 1990s, it housed 450 residents, although it had a capacity for 600. So, in conclusion, I'm going to read most of his conclusion of the concluding chapter here. In 1953, Richard de Racemus-Kipp ended the last paragraph of fraternal life insurance in America with the topic heading, Vanishing Fraternalism. 36 years later, Mary Ann Clausen echoed that theme by writing that while fraternal societies continued to exist after the Depression, their greatly diminished size, aging memberships, and public marginality marked them as anachronisms. Their inflated rhetoric and unself-conscious depiction of hierarchy has made them the stuff of comedy for at least a generation. So much is this the case that we take them seriously only through an effort of imagination and scholarship. So she doesn't like hierarchy. Okay. Yet, despite such pronouncements, Moose International and other societies stubbornly refused to assume their assigned fates as anachronisms by vanishing. During the 1980s and 1990s, there were modest signs of resurgence, although these were not entirely unambiguous. In 1987, there were 9.1 million fraternal insurance certificates in force. By 1996, this had increased to 10.7 million, so modest growth. The number of lodges rose from 42,669 to 43,282, so modest growth, but growth instead of shrinkage. Meanwhile, the official annual disbursements on charity, though a far cry from the extensive social welfare of earlier periods, more than tripled from $10 million to $30 million. The Benevolent and Protective Order of Elks and the FOE each had 1 million members in 1996. The membership of Moose International was 1.7 million, more than at any time during the 20s and 30s. But there has been a fundamental transformation in the nature of fraternalism. For the most part, fraternal membership, although still heavily working class, no longer includes the very poor. The rise of alternative forms of social welfare, government welfare, has dramatically reduced the demand for social welfare services among members. Mutual aid was a creature of necessity. Once this necessity ended, so too did the primary reason for the existence of fraternalism. Without a return to this necessity, any revival of mutual aid will remain limited. The shift from mutual aid and self-help to the welfare state has involved more than a simple bookkeeping transfer of service provision from one set of institutions to another. As many of the leaders of fraternal societies had feared, much was lost in an exchange that transcended monetary calculations. The old relationships of voluntary reciprocity and autonomy have slowly given way to paternalistic dependency. Instead of mutual aid, the dominant social welfare arrangements of Americans have increasingly become characterized by impersonal bureaucracies controlled by outsiders. Right, so that is sort of the sad story of the decline of mutual aid societies. Classic didn't throw in more stuff. Let's see. He says gross membership peaked in the 1950s, but social service expenses were gutted and dues were slashed. Then the boomers didn't join and membership collapsed. The Moose have about the same membership as they did in the 1920s. So that particular order is doing okay. So, future of mutual aid. Here's some thoughts from me, just having gone through the series and done this book. Well, first of all, I'd like to see it return. I'd like to see mutual aid return. That's why I'm doing the series. I think it was a good thing, and it was superior to a lot of the arrangements we have now. So what are the lessons we can learn from this history? Probably a lot more than I thought of, but I'll just give a few. Meet real needs, as he emphasized at the end, right? One that I see right now is the need for insurance against being canceled for your political opinions, cancel insurance. We're not going to get that from the regime. We're probably not going to get that from any regular insurance company, right? But we could do that with each other somehow, maybe. So, basically we contribute in such a way that we contribute, and then when someone gets in trouble, uh, we help them. Someone gets canceled, we help them until they can find another job or whatever. Now we have done this already in an informal way, not by having a fund ready or anything like that, but just someone gets canceled and we help them. This happened with our friend George Bagby. It happened with Academic Agent when he was canceled from his job as a professor. A number of us just contributed and helped them through to set up something else. We can formalize that a little bit, but the idea would be the same, right? Help your friends when they get targeted. So that's one area. Here's another area. I think there's even an opportunity in the medical area. And I want to drop a link for you to something called Samaritan Ministries. Here it is in the live chat. They are showing another way to support each other in this area with something they call Christian healthcare sharing. So it's like, it sort of fills the role that paying an insurance premium would, but it's for people who don't want to do that for various reasons, feel that there's something not good about it or not Christian about it. And so this is a thing where you send money to people who are in need, and Samaritan Ministries is just sort of the coordinator, but you're just directly helping others. And they encourage that you pray for those. You don't just provide money, you also pray for them, right? So again, try to go beyond just a financial transaction, as David Beta wrote at the end of the book. So meet real needs. That's lesson number one. Lesson number two, be actuarially sound. Where money is involved, there must be accountability and prudence. This is just a basic that has to be gotten right if we're going to do this sort of thing. The people with the vision for building up new mutual aid societies may not be the ones with gift of management needed to handle the monetary aspect and make sure that the books are balancing and all that sort of stuff, right? So it's going to be really important for people to set ego aside and enjoy the power of division of labor and diverse gifts. Well, I think we'll have people with a vision for it, and we'll have people who can run the day-to-day affairs in a competent, professional, and accountable way, right? We have an advantage over the folks from 100 years ago, 100 plus years ago, which is we are on the other side of the welfare state. We saw some great prophetic words, but there were others who were like, oh, maybe it'll be good, right? Well, now we've had, if you count from 1935 in the United States, we're heading towards a century of social welfare. And we know that it is an acid that dissolves marriages, families, neighborhoods, communities, right? And I'd recommend on this, by the way, Charles Murray's book, Losing Ground. He spells out the incentives that were put into place with the Great Society programs under LBJ and shows how their impact started immediately and has just gotten worse over time. But he really shows the mechanism. So we know something they don't know, which is they didn't necessarily know from experience. We have the experience now. We see the dependency that gets created. We see the toxic effect to human relations. And so, when the government comes along and says, hey, that's kind of neat what you're doing there. Let us help you. Let's have some legislation to, protect you from competitors, all the stuff that the mutual aid societies got tempted by. I think we'd be in a stronger position now to go, no, thanks. We know the strings that are attached, right? And, it wouldn't shock me to find that people who have the option to take advantage of government programs or health insurance through their employer, if there was a credible alternative, they might do it simply because they know that these other systems are not good. They're managerial systems that are not good for human relations, and people might just prefer to opt out of them. I'd love to see some other options available. I'd love to be using a different option for my health insurance and so forth. Something that is more expressive of my own values. And then final point I thought of, and hopefully you'll, who've gone through the series, can think of some of your own. A welfare state bureaucracy is not a drop-in replacement for personal support and mutual aid. I'm reminded, as I often am, of the failure to thrive scenario, right? I think it was orphans after World War II, maybe World War One. There's a bunch of babies that are orphaned. They're, they're lined up in the nursery there, and they're giving them food, and they're changing their diapers, and they're dying. And they eventually realized that simply providing those material needs was not enough. The babies needed human contact. They needed to be held. They needed to be talked to, or they would have failure to thrive, which could result in declining health or even death. So simply handing people food or dollars is not the same thing as having a bond, a human bond, a relationship. So that's the final lesson I think we can learn here, is that if we are to do this again, we shouldn't just think about it in terms of managing an economic arrangement. We should think of it as building relationships. If we build strong relationships and strong bonds, if we're prudent about any money that gets involved with it, then I think we can build something solid that becomes a true alternative to the systems that are on offer for us, and truly help each other. So that is the mutual aid series. Thanks for those who have been along, and thanks for Clossington for jumping in multiple times to bring his knowledge of this area. And I think that is about it for today. Let me just check one more thing. And yes, and we'll be back next week with Black Horse, and I'll get back to Twitter and see what exciting political developments, because it's been quite the last 24 or 48 hours have been quite intense. But I put them out of my mind and finished our mutual aid series. So, okay, well, thanks everybody, and thanks for the support of those who are about to be listed, if everything works right. Talk to you next week.